It's never too early to be planning for your future, especially when it comes to your future freedom. The video that you're about to watch features Richard Krohn, based on his book, The Parallel University. In this video, Richard outlines how you can create a balanced life and have it all. But in order to do this, you need to ask yourself a pressing question. In the future, are you going to be a weight on society, or are you going to look after yourself? It is up to us whether we put our faith in institutions or in government, or whether we choose to live an independent and meaningful life. Rather than living a passive life, we should have the agency and individuality relying on our own individual strength to create a meaningful and positive experience. Everybody in our generation has the opportunity to be a self-funded retiree and to live an independent life. So all you need to do is to ask yourself a question. Do you want to be a self-reliant, prosperous person or not?
Only 1 in 5 of my generation makes it to be a self-funded retiree. But the good news is that everybody in your generation has an opportunity to do that. In order to achieve your dreams, all you really need to do is make a decision when you're 18. A decision is, are you going to be a self-reliant, prosperous person, or are you going to be somebody that wants to rely on community for the rest of your life? Are you going to take the hard road or the easy road? The hard road means that you will have significant issues in your life that you'll have to deal with. The easy road is that you allow the community to look after you. The problem with doing that, however, is that it's built into your DNA to survive. And if you don't use those survival skills, obviously, sometimes it just becomes a lot more difficult to deal with. So what do you need to do to be self-funded? You need to have 3 major expenses in your life looked after. The first is buying a house, the second one is educating your children, and the third one is funding your own retirement. Now today a lot of people are told that that's really difficult, but if you start when you're 18, put $100 a week away, in 10 years' time you'll have $82,000. That's enough to get you started, especially if you've got a partner. The secret is you've got to use compound interest. Einstein said that compound interest was the greatest force in humanity. And if you use it over a long period of time, the compound interest will develop a fund that will help you through the whole of your life. But in order to do that, you're going to need a plan. Plans are incredibly important. And this plan for your life needs to start with an understanding of the environment in which you're living in. You then have to understand yourself. And after understanding yourself, you can create a vision of where you're going, create some goals, and then build some basic plans on how to achieve those goals. Now, your environment is basically a function of the political, cultural, economic, and financial situation in which you live. Now, this is changing at a much greater rate than it ever has in history, and you've got to keep your eye on what's happening. For example, in politics today, politics is really a function of your values, and where you stand in politics comes from asking yourself one question. Do I think that I should look after myself, or do I think the government should look after me? Once you've answered that question, most of the other questions just fall into place. There are 2 big political discussions at the moment that need to be dealt with. The first one is globalism versus tribalism. And to understand that, you need to refer to the Tower of Babel. The second one is, do we want to continue to increase the size and extent of government, or do we want to put more responsibility back on individuals? The next thing you've got to look at is culture. When you look at culture, it's been developed over thousands of years. But one of the things that's built into our DNA, along with the need to survive and procreate, is the need to believe in something. Now, thousands of years ago, we believed in myths. Then myths moved into religion. Then through the Enlightenment, we went from religion to science and objective thought. And in the last 50 or 60 years, we've gone into the postmodernist era of subjective reality. The point is, you need to figure out what you believe in. And in understanding that, you need to figure out what's happened in the past, because people have been looking at this for thousands of years, and the really smart people have written some stuff about it, and it's really important that you read that stuff, because today we seem to be incredibly narcissistic and believe that we can come to a conclusion all by ourselves. The economy. As little as 100 years ago, 95% of people worked and lived just to survive. Over that last 100 years, 90% of those have come out of poverty, and as a result, a middle class was built. To the extent that now 36% of our GDP is spent by government, and only 26% is actually wealth creation. The rest is using wealth in order to basically provide our materialistic desires. Now, the point that needs to be made here is that the more of the economy that's used not to create wealth, the harder it is to get wage growth. Finance. Over the last 100 years, the growth in the middle class has basically occurred because as the Industrial Revolution went forward, wage growth was huge, productivity increases were huge, and people built middle class wealth out of income. That's starting to come to a halt. And in fact, middle class wealth is being built from capital and returns on capital. And what you've got to understand is that over the last 40 years, the market's returned 11.4% and super funds have returned 7.4%. Now, Kenneth Hayne basically told us where the 4% goes, but what you've got to realise is that every 1% of those fees that are taken out represent $1 million for you in retirement. The economy and the environment has been changing dramatically over the last 50 years. 50 years ago, we started a process of economic rationalisation, and that economic rationalisation put hundreds of thousands of people out of work. But what happened was, we didn't have a plan of what those people were going to do. The same thing's happening now. The society is starting to realise that the huge amount of red tape is causing extra costs that aren't creating wealth. And on top of that, it's simply the legal system doesn't work in terms of regulating bad behaviour. We've built up huge amount of costs there, and you will have noticed in the press over the last month or so that tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of jobs are being lost. And this is where you need to understand the difference between conservatives and progressives. A conservative is somebody that wants to change their weight slowly. So if they're climbing up a hill, they'll reach out for a handhold, put a little bit of weight on it, then a little bit more weight, and then slowly transfer 100% of their weight. A progressive just whacks their hand up there and pulls and hopes like hell that it's going to hang on. And that's what's happening with the economy at the moment. We can't put hundreds of thousands of people out of jobs unless we have something for them to do. We don't want to repeat what happened with economic rationalisation. So that's our environment. Now we need to look at you as an individual. Before you can really understand yourself as an individual, you really need to be free. And that means free of other people looking after you, free of reliance on family, friends, and government. Because when you're self-reliant, when you're free, then you can actually look at yourself. What you've got to remember is that mankind's been around for 600,000 years. 1,000 years ago, people became adults at 12 to 14. 100 years ago, people became adults at 16 to 18. Now we've got 30-year-olds that are still not adults and are not taking responsibility for themselves. And on the other hand, we wonder why the rates of suicide, depression and delinquency are skyrocketing. Now, in looking at yourself, you've got to look at 5 factors. And the first factor is lifestyle. Do I want to live in the country? Do I want to live in the city? Do I want to have a big family, a small family? Do I want to work long hours? What sort of lifestyle do I want to live? The second one is job satisfaction. And remember, every job's the same after 6 months, and that came from a test fighter pilot. Doesn't matter what you get into, there are going to be things that happen every day and they're going to be boring, and you'd better love those boring things if you want to get good job satisfaction. Financial reward. How much money do you need? My definition of wealth is having $1 more in income each year than you possibly have in expenditure. For some people that may be $20,000 or $30,000 a year. For other people it may be $500,000 to $600,000 a year. But you won't know that until you budget. So you need to set down a budget and then make sure you've got enough income to cover the budget. The fourth point is kudos. How do you want to be applauded by your peers and by the community? Some people don't care what other people think. A lot of people do care a great deal. And the fifth one is ethics. Are you going to play it straight, or are you prepared to bend the rules? Which one is it for you? So what you need to do is take these 5 elements of yourself and create your own balance. Your balance is going to be different to everybody else's. Yours will be a unique balance just for you. So after this process, what you've got is a good understanding of the game that you're playing and the field that you're playing on it. You've also got a good understanding of yourself and where you want to go. From that, you've got to put that together and create some visions. After you've created the visions, then you need to be able to create goals. Now those goals will be financial goals, there'll be personal goals, there'll be all sorts of goals that you need to put down, lifestyle goals. You need to lock these in as a function of what you want to become. Once you've got the goal, you need to write it down. It's only a dream until you write it down, and then it becomes a goal. It's statistically proven that written goals are achieved much more than those that aren't written. Prepare to write yourself a plan. That plan has got to have times and quantities in it. You can't just waffle through a plan. It's got to have structure and definition. A good example of that is I plan to save $100 a week for 10 years at a 10% interest rate return, and at the end I'm going to end up with $82,000. I could also say that as a graduate and starting salary of $50,000, putting 9.5% away or $100 a week for 45 years will give me $2.5 million in retirement. With your superannuation, what you've got to recognise is that over a return of about 8%, every 1% extra that you get will create another $1 million in retirement. And what you all need to understand very clearly is that in your lifetime you will actually earn more from unearned income than you will from earned income. So isn't it worth spending a little bit of time just getting that unearned income up there and right? It's the difference on the same salary of retiring with $4.5 million on a 10% return and $450,000 on a 7% return. So how do you do this? Well, in order to do it, you need a whole lot of skills. You need skills in all sorts of different areas, but the major skill that you need is a human resources skill, because you're not going to have the ability to do all these things to get the return that you need. So you need to be able to find the right people to do the right thing for you. The more you do yourself, the less the fees you pay, the higher your return, but the longer it will take. So taking responsibility for yourself is the major thing that you've got to choose, whether you're going to do that or not. It's my feeling that taking responsibility for yourself and looking after yourself for the whole of your life is the most important thing you can do to help our society as a whole. Now, I often talk about what is an adult. An adult is somebody that's completely developed. In my language, that means that they're completely developed to the stage where they can actually look after themselves. And I know very clearly that some people become adults at 18, some people at 35, and some never make it. So are you going to take control of your life? Now, I know a lot of you are sitting back watching this thinking, well, that doesn't really apply to me. But I hate to tell you, it does. Because 60% of Australian families pay no net tax, 80% of retirees are on a government pension or not pension. So your choice is, are you going to be a weight on society, or are you going to look after yourself?